Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more homeowner association stories. In this video, a crazy HOA Karen calls the police and wants me arrested for wearing a bikini because I am disabled and she does not want to look at me. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one starts like this. So before I start, I need to preface this story with the fact that I have a disability. I'm physically handicapped from an accident I had when I was in my teens. I've lost most of the feeling in my legs and I require the use of a wheelchair when I need to move around. I can still do a lot of things on my own, but I do require assistance with certain activities, which I'll talk about later. And the fact that I'm in a wheelchair most of the time is also important to this story. So my husband and I moved into a home that is in an HOA. It was one of the few houses in the area that had a ranch-style design and no steps to get to the front door, easier for me to get in and out of the house without assistance. We also fell in love with it because of the backyard, which had its own pool. The backyard was fenced in with a gate, giving the yard some privacy. It was a really nice place and we made sure to keep up with the standards that the HOA had. The head of the HOA was a woman named Brenda. She came over to welcome us when we first moved in and seemed a little taken aback by me and my wheelchair. As much as I would like to think that people are used to seeing people in wheelchairs or using assistive technology out in public, her look of shock was not surprising to me. I did not think too much of it, but as time went on it seemed like she was more inclined to speak to my husband rather than me whenever she had something to talk to us about again. He was the man of the house, I get it. There should have been some red flags raised about Brenda when my husband first made a request to update the pool to include shallow steps and handles to replace the ladders and to install a ramp leading into the shallow side of the pool. We were willing to pay for it all, but because of the HOA guidelines, it was something we had to get approved before going along with any contractors. We had submitted the request in the spring, and by that winter, we never got a response no matter how many times my husband or I tried to get a hold of anyone on the board. Brenda would meet any emails or phone messages we left with either silence or an excuse that she was far too busy to look into our request because it was a cosmetic change only. Anything I said to counter that, since it could assist with my quality of life, was shot down or ignored. So my husband and I looked into alternative ways to update the pool without permanently altering it. As the next spring rolled around, we were able to find a set of stairs that could be installed outside the pool that led into the shallow area. I would still need assistance from my husband to sit on the steps, but it was better than nothing and I'd actually have the chance to enjoy our pool. Best of all, the installation required no tools, so all that needed to be done was rest the top part of the steps on the concrete outside the pool and the base of the steps at the bottom of the pool. I'll link what I found here if someone in a similar situation wants one. Anyway, it's still a little pricey. Still, I was excited and my husband was happy to be able to get me in the water. Of course, when the steps came and my husband worked on the installation, Brenda made her way over to our home to inform us that she was gonna fine us for what we were doing to the pool. My husband showed her that there was nothing that would need to be drilled or installed into the concrete and that the steps could be taken out of the pool and put somewhere else. Brenda still insisted this was a violation and would be speaking to the board about it, but we never heard back about it. When the first hot week of summer rolled in, my husband and I were outside almost every day. The stairs worked perfectly, and with just the help of my husband getting me out of the chair and seated on the steps, I could lift myself up or down, depending on how wet I wanted to get. Not only was it awesome to finally be able to get into a pool, but my doctor had shown me a few things I could do in the water as therapy to get some muscle back into my legs. We had not heard from Brenda since the installation incident, so I thought it would be the end of our encounters. I want to say it was about 2 weeks later after we first got to use the pool that things escalated. I was outside by the pool dressed in a bikini and settled in my chair. There was a breeze, so I did not feel warm enough to ask my husband to get me in the pool, but I hoped taking in a little more sun would do the trick. My husband, who had just gotten done with some yard work, had decided to take a dip and was swimming around while we chatted from time to time. It was turning out to be a wonderful afternoon until I heard someone shriek from our fence, and when I say shriek, I mean it sounded like one of those horror movie screams. I thought someone was dying at first. I looked around and saw Brenda opening the gate to our yard, storming over towards me. Her face was red and she was sputtering about how I am inappropriate. My husband was getting out of the pool quickly, putting himself between her and me as she kept screaming that I was indecent for showing off my body like that. I wheeled around my husband and asked her what was wrong with the way I dressed in my own yard. Well, she claimed that even with the fence people could see me and it was not right that I was in a bikini of all things. police. So yeah, Brenda did not even look me in the eye as she said her piece, and it hit me that she truly thought I was lesser than her because of my disability. I had my phone on me, and since I had not gotten in the water yet and started to record the incident, especially since Brenda was getting louder and louder, and I seriously thought that she would lash out at me physically. My husband, the amazing and awesome person that he is, did not raise his voice at her and kept calmly asking her to get out of our yard and leave us alone. Brenda seemed even more agitated now, claiming that I was flaunting myself for the neighborhood to see my ugly and broken body. Again, me and my husband didn't have much else to say, except to repeat that she needed to get out of our yard. Then she did the unthinkable. She whipped out her phone and called the cops on us. Brenda refused to leave the yard, and my husband and I moved away from her after she called the police, just to make sure she didn't try anything that could get physical. My husband had wanted to try and get her to back out of the yard, not touching her, but just moving towards her so that she would take a few steps back. But he was afraid that even brushing up against her would cause even more problems. When the police did arrive, Brenda had a story for them, claiming that my husband had tried to shove her and even punched her, which, with no marks and even with my recording still going, there wasn't any evidence that he had done anything to her for the officers to see. One officer stayed with her while the other came to talk to me and my husband. The first thing he asked was if this was our property or Brenda's. We explained that it was ours, but she was the HOA president, and he looked exasperated, shaking his head and saying that regardless of what she claimed, if we owned the home and this was our yard, the fact that she came to the property uninvited was cause for us to request her to leave and that the officers would escort her out. I stopped my recording and showed him the beginning, which included her comments towards me and how she had been yelling at my husband. The officer understood and had us follow him back to Brenda, who was rambling to the other officer about how horrible we were treating her. The officer that we'd been talking to spoke to her, telling her that she could be arrested then and there for calling 911 without a real reason. He said that this was our yard and we had the right to privacy. He'd confirm with the HOA rules, but knew that he wouldn't find anything in there about swimwear. But Brenda had trespassed on our property and caused a scene that could have escalated. She could either leave the property of her own accord, or the police would escort her to the station. Brenda chose the former, but did shoot my husband and I a dirty look, claiming that she knew her rights and this was not over. The officers left, wishing us a nice afternoon. I knew Brenda would find another way to disrupt my and my husband's life, so I took to social media and posted the recording I made, including the phone call she made to the police. I explained the whole situation, including the remarks that hadn't been made on the recording and how this behavior was dangerous to other members of the community that needed wheelchairs or who had other disabilities. I made the post on a Wednesday, and by Friday it had blown up and was shared by hundreds of people. We got a phone call later that day from the local news asking if they could use it as part of a segment about the HOA. I gave them permission and watched it shared with the entire city on the Saturday afternoon news. I had submitted a complaint to the HOA about Brenda immediately after the yard incident just to make sure they knew what she was doing. According to one of my neighbors, the HOA board was flooded with calls and emails after the social media post and the television segment, and it was clear that they were going to have to do something about Brenda. Less than a week later, we got a notice that Brenda had been removed from the board, and because everyone was so appalled by her behavior, she actually had to move out of the HOA. I'm just glad that I'll never have to deal with her again. In the end though, it was a good thing for me and the entirety of the HOA that she got her comeuppance. And the next one is an amazing malicious compliance story. And by the way, if you ever had any people as horrible as Brenda in your neighborhood, then I would love to hear your story in the comments. And while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much. So for this story you need to know that I'm the kind of person who will go a great distance for a good laugh, as you will see below. I love this story and we tell it every once in a while, even though it has been more than 20 years already. So I live in the US and I own an IT support company. Many years ago I used a cell phone company named Nextel. They had this great push-to-talk feature that turned your phone into a walkie-talkie, which was perfect for communicating with coworkers in my IT work. However, their customer service was a nightmare. Anytime I needed to contact them, it would take at least 30 to 40 minutes on hold. Eventually, I had to switch to a cheaper service, which meant getting a new number. Now, you can port your number to a new carrier, but back then you had to change numbers if you switched carriers. So I cancelled all the phones on our plan except for mine, which I downgraded to an emergency plan costing about $10 a month. I left the old phone plugged in at my office and set my voicemail message to instruct callers of my new number. The phone just sat next to my desk on a shelf plugged into a charger so that I could see if anyone called. I could also hear the phone make a sound when it disconnected from the cellular network and then a different sound when it connected to the cellular network. It connected and disconnected constantly there in my office. I would estimate that it only stayed connected to the network about 50% of the time. After 6 months, I decided to cancel it. I had to wait on hold for the customary 30 to 40 minutes just to cancel my service. After telling the service rep that I was always dropping off the network and that I had already switched services, they verified the service problems on my account and cancelled my entire plan. I was not under any contract at the time, so there was no problem cancelling my service with Nextel. As expected, I got my final bill. It was somewhere around $10 since that was my monthly plan, just the emergency plan, and I didn't make any phone calls, so I paid the bill and was happy to be done with that carrier. Then the next month I got a bill for 4 cents. Yes, just 4 cents. I figured it was a clerical error and ignored it, expecting them to write it off. But no, each month another bill for 4 cents arrived. I was incredulous. I checked the postmark and saw that the postage to send me the bill was costing them 10 times more than the bill itself. And they kept sending the bill every month. I could have paid the bill, but it seemed ridiculous to write a check for 4 cents and spend more on a stamp. After 6 months I finally had enough and decided on some very petty malicious compliance. I decided to invest the 40 minutes on hold to call Nextel to work this out. By golly, if they wanted my 4 cents, I would give them my 4 cents. I planned to wait on hold for 40 minutes and pay the 4 cents with a credit card, knowing it would cost them even more in fees. I told my wife about my plan, thinking it was the perfect malicious compliance story. But my wife, the true master of malicious compliance, suggested an even better idea. Call and ask if I could make payments on the 4 cents, splitting it into 2 payments on my credit card. Oh my god, I was in the presence of malicious royalty. So I called and waited on hold for 40 to 45 minutes and finally got through to a representative. The representative sounded like one of those airport terminal attendants who act like they are checking your reservations, but instead they are writing a Stephen King-length novel. I could hear the clickety-clackety sound of the keyboard. The female representative was constantly typing as I explained that I had cancelled my service, but I kept getting the final bill and proposed making payments. The representative, typing away, said that she would look up my account. As she typed away at her keyboard, I explained that I had gotten the final bill and that I would like to set up a payment plan to take care of the outstanding balance. I told her that I would like to pay half on my credit card today and pay the remaining half the following month. She was agreeing with me and typing away when suddenly she stopped typing and went quiet. "Sir," she said. "Yes," I replied. "Are you aware of the balance amount?" "Yes," I said. 4 cents? She said. "Yes," I said. "I figured that you really wanted that 4 cents because you keep spending all this postage to send me bills each month, so I'm just calling you to take care of it." After a brief silence, I heard the clickety-clack of the keyboard again, and she said that I would not have to worry about the balance because she was writing it off. I insisted on giving my credit card for the first half of the payment, but she firmly dismissed it and assured me that I would not get any more bills. My wife's suggestion turned a simple prank into a masterpiece of malicious compliance. I may be good at it, but my wife is on another level. And you really have to want to do malicious compliance to wait on hold for 40 minutes. And by the way, although I have fond memories of this story, my wife and I both laugh at the other, possibly better options of dealing with the situation. So, first a couple of commenters stated that I was stupid for waiting on the phone for 40 minutes to do this. Yes, no argument there, but my first line above states that I'll go a great distance for a laugh. However, no customer service reps were injured in this exercise. The conversation only took a couple minutes. I saved the company money because they fixed their stupid error. They stopped spending more on postage than the actual bill, and I was working in my office while I was on hold. So a little time traded for a funny story. Second, some people had great ideas for other possibilities. Most suggested paying slightly more than the 4 cents so that Nextel would have to deal with the refund. Then Nextel would constantly have to send me statements in the mail. I liked this one too, and if Nextel ever sent the refund check, I would not cash it. I know in my own business that when a customer writes a check for a penny off, it causes me at least 5 minutes to fix. Sometimes it even takes a little longer, so this option appeals to me too. And the next one is a little Neighbor from Hell saga, and it is titled "Neighbor Tried to Make My Life Hell." When my wife and I moved into our house, there was a rental next door. Renter was a nice guy, quiet and kept to himself. He moved out after a year and a couple moved in with a small child. Again, basically good neighbors. I'm not super outgoing and chatty, but when I would talk to them, it was always pleasant. After a year, they moved out as well, and a single woman who was probably in her early 50s moved in. We will call her Nancy. She was nice enough, and our interaction basically consisted of me saying hello if she was outside when I got home from work, and vice versa. She was nice enough, and our interaction basically consisted of me saying hello if she was outside when I got home from work, and vice versa. After Nancy had been in the house for a year, she mentioned to me during one of our routine greetings that her daughter was going to be moving in with her. I probably said something like, "That's nice," and went into my house. A couple days later, there was a pickup outside, and Nancy and a younger woman were moving boxes into the house. I never did catch her daughter's name, still have no idea what it was to this day. Maybe a week after that, in passing, Nancy mentioned that her daughter's boyfriend would be moving in too. He had just been discharged from service in Afghanistan. Again, I really did not think much about it other than that it was a small house for 3 people to live in. Boyfriend moved in a few days later and came with 2 very large black Labrador retrievers. I never got his name either, and this is where the fun begins. So at this point in our lives, my wife and I had a 1-year-old and 3-year-old. The 3-year-old had a room at the back of the house with a window that overlooked my neighbor's yard. Both kids still took naps in the afternoon at that age, and routinely my 3-year-old would be woken up or not be able to go to sleep because they would let the dogs out and they would be barking incessantly right below her window. So then I went over and talked to Nancy, explained the situation and asked if they could just make sure they took the dogs into their house if they start barking between like 1 to 3 p.m. Her response was that it was a small house and they could not really keep the dogs inside for that long. I said I understood and I was not trying to make a big deal out of it, but it would be very helpful if she could do that. It lasted for maybe a couple days before the dogs were out there barking for hours on end, so I started putting my 3-year-old down for a nap in our room or her sister's room, since they were both in the front of the house and you could not hear the barking as loudly. Another fun thing about the dogs was the fact that Nancy, her daughter and boyfriend never ever cleaned up the poop in the backyard, so going into a hot summer, there were piles of moldy feces all over the yard, making it stink. I was about to call the city when Nancy and her daughter went out to clean it all up, which seemed like a good sign at the time. So, with the backyard not stinking, I went out and laid about $250 worth of cedar mulch around the border of my yard, which was all flower beds for about a foot from the fence. Where I live, everybody has a fence around their entire backyard. A couple days later, Nancy and her daughter's boyfriend installed an easy set above ground pool in their yard and filled it. Presumably this is why the dog poop was cleaned up. I saw them use it once. For those who are not familiar with the Easy Set pool, it does not have a rigid outer frame, it has an inflatable ring that keeps it up, but the sides are soft and can be easily pulled down. I woke up one morning and looked outside into my backyard and a swath of my mulch was gone from the border, and in my grass, all the flowers were on the ground facing towards my lawn and away from the fence. I went outside to figure out what happened and noticed the water in their pool was way lower. It was pretty obvious that the dogs had been trying to climb into the pool and had pulled down the side, letting water rush into my yard in large quantities. I went next door to talk to Nancy about what happened and showed her the damage to my yard. She was actually very apologetic and offered me $40 to get new mulch, which I accepted. I cleaned up the mulch from my grass so it did not tear up my lawnmower blade, got several new bags and laid them down where the water had washed it away. 3 days later it happened again. This time when I approached Nancy about it, she seemed annoyed and asked me what I wanted her to do about it. My answer was maybe don't leave their dogs unsupervised with a soft side pool in the yard. That seemed to piss her off though. I had a friend who did a lot of do-it-yourself building projects and he hooked me up with some sheet metal that he helped me cut, grind the sharp edges and drill, so I was able to attach an 8-inch high shield along the bottom of the length of the fence on our property border. While I was installing it, Nancy came out to tell me that it was ugly. I told her it was not for looks and it was less ugly than wood chips in my grass. It worked pretty well too. It was not watertight or anything, but the next few times the dogs pulled down the side of the pool, the water hit the barrier and a small amount got through the cracks, but it did not mess up the mulch I laid down, and most of the water appeared to rebound back into their yard. From the dogs running around and their pee killing the grass, the yard had become dirt, and the water washing the dirt up against my barrier made a natural basin, so now the water just ended up pooling around the pool and making a mud pit that the dogs would play in and then run into the house tracking in mud, and I could hear them yelling at the dogs when it would happen. The pool was down within a few weeks of my barrier going up, but I left it up because at that point I did not want to go through the trouble of taking it down again. Around this time there was a guy who started coming over to the house. I was never really sure if he knew the boyfriend or the daughter, or both. He had a military look to him, high and tight haircut, and a pretty muscular guy who carried himself like a marine. I nicknamed him Buzzcut as a way to refer to him to my wife when talking about what was going on next door. He seemed to come over pretty frequently, and he would be out back with the boyfriend drinking beers and shooting the crap. It was maybe a month after Buzzcut started showing up that I noticed the dogs were gone. I had gotten so used to their constant barking, I totally tuned it out until it just stopped one day. The next day, I saw Buzzcut and the boyfriend show up and start taking boxes out to a pickup truck. I thought maybe Nancy's daughter and boyfriend had gotten a place of their own. For 2 weeks I enjoyed the quiet, and from what I could tell, Nancy was the only one in the house. A couple weeks went by, and one day I saw the same pickup outside and Buzzcut was moving boxes into the house. Over the next couple days I just saw Nancy's daughter, no boyfriend or dogs. I don't know what happened, but my guess was that they broke up. Buzzcut was still coming over every few days, but the boyfriend was MIA. One night midsummer, there were a bunch of people over at Nancy's house and they had the windows on the side facing my house open. The houses are pretty close together and they were being loud and playing music while I was trying to get my kids to go to sleep. So I went over and asked if they could maybe keep it down a bit as I was trying to get my kids to sleep. This is how I met Nancy's sister, Aunt Karen. Aunt Karen came to the door and I nicely explained that I was trying to get a 3- and 1-year-old to sleep and could they maybe turn down the music a bit. However, Aunt Karen got all huffy and said it was not 10 PM. For context, 10 PM is when noise violation goes into effect in my town. You have to be quiet-ish after 10. I said I understood it was only 9 PM, but I was asking nicely if they could just turn it down a bit. She repeated that it was not 10, so I said if that was how they wanted to do this, I would just call the police at 10, and I left. At 10 PM and 30 seconds, they suddenly turned down the music and shut the windows of the house. A few days later I was cutting the grass between our houses and there was a bunch of cat litter with cat poop in it strewn all over the grass on both sides of the property line. I was not even aware they had a cat, and while it was disgusting, I decided not to make a big deal out of it. A few weeks after the party, there is a knock on my door and a visibly angry Aunt Karen is on my porch. When I went to the door, she started screaming at me saying, "Where's my niece's cat?" I myself don't take kindly to being randomly screamed at, so my response was something along the lines of, "What the F are you talking about?" Aunt Karen said that her niece told her that I was enticing the cat onto my porch with treats and that she thought I kidnapped it. I told Aunt Karen that I had never seen their cat and that we already had 3 cats, so there was no reason for us to steal a 4th one. I asked if it had a name or address tag on its collar, but it didn't, and I suggested maybe she should call animal control and see if someone brought it in. She demanded to look in my house and I told her no, that if she was convinced I had kidnapped the cat, she was welcome to report a crime to the police, but I was not letting some random person I didn't know into my house. So she left in a huff. After these 2 encounters with Aunt Karen, I concluded that she was kind of an a-hole. Over the next couple of months, as we moved into early fall, I had my first 2, and only 2, conversations with Nancy's daughter that I ever had in the entire time she lived there. The first was when a storm was rolling in. I went out to my front porch to take the cushions off the wicker furniture we had out there so it did not blow away. She was on her porch, and as lightning started to light up the sky, I said to her, "Wow, looks like this is gonna be a pretty bad storm. Stay safe." She just smiled back at me. The second was the following weekend. I was doing some work outdoors in the backyard, my kids were playing in the sandbox and my wife was out there, and Nancy's daughter asked my wife how old our kids were. She then mentioned she was 4 months pregnant, to which both my wife and I said, "Congratulations." This literally was the extent of all the verbal interaction I ever had with this woman. Near the end of September, Nancy threw a huge party at her house one Saturday night. There were a ton of people over in the house and backyard drinking and listening to music. It was not a big deal and my kids actually went to bed pretty close to on time. Then around midnight someone cranked up the music so loud, I went back out and got the attention of one of the partygoers and asked them to turn the music down, which they totally did. Then at 1 AM it cranked back up again. I went out back and the party had thinned way out, but Buzzcut was back there drunk as hell. I came out of my back door and walked over to the fence and said, "Hey, it's 1 AM, you gotta turn that music down." He gave me a hard, flat stare. I said, "Seriously, it's late and I will call the police if it doesn't quiet down." He was still just glaring and staring at me, so I turned around and walked inside. By the time I got to the phone and was dialing, the music went off. The next weekend I went to the grocery store early on Saturday morning, and when I got back I parked my car in the street in front of my house. A couple hours later I noticed a U-Haul truck in front of my other neighbor's house. I did not really think anything of it. I figured maybe my neighbor on the other side, Linda, had bought some furniture or was moving stuff to storage. Later that afternoon, we took the kids out to dinner in our other car and stopped to pick up a few things I had forgotten at the grocery store earlier. When we got back from dinner, I noticed people, including my old friend Aunt Karen, carrying boxes from Nancy's house 2 doors down to the U-Haul in front of Linda's house, so at that point I realized they were probably moving out and walking everything down 2 doors to the U-Haul. There was a pickup truck in front of Nancy's house all loaded up too. Not sure why they could not have swapped out the truck for the U-Haul, so it was closer. The way their driveway was sloped, I don't expect the U-Haul could get into the driveway without bottoming out. I took my groceries into the house and started walking back out to move my car into the driveway, figuring they could back the U-Haul closer to their house. As I was walking out my door, there was Buzzcut walking over and yelling, "Are you gonna move your car for that little lady or what?" I said, "Relax man, I am moving my car right now. Nobody told me they were moving. I would have moved it earlier if I had known." So at that point he went ballistic. "She came over to ask you nicely to move your car and you laughed in her face. These people have been nothing but nice to you and all you can do is be a total son of a gun to them." There was spittle flying as he went full Marine drill sergeant yell on this. My response was, "Huh? Nobody came over here to ask me to move my car. I don't know what you're talking about. Seriously, I would have moved it. I have nothing against them whatsoever." Buzzcut went full drill sergeant again. "BS, you're an a-hole who went out of your way to make their lives miserable. They are moving because of you." This was perplexing because I never spoke to them other than hello, have a nice day, and the brief conversations I outlined above. At this point I was done with this conversation, so I just said, "I'm going to move my car. I've got nothing else to say about this except I hope we never see each other again and F you." So then I moved my car. As I walked from my car to my front door, Buzzcut was still screaming full bore, not even sure what he was saying, but I flicked him off as I walked inside and shut the door. Nancy was fully moved out of the house the next day, and I avoided going out there while they were finishing moving because I did not want to deal with them. I never saw her daughter, the boyfriend, Aunt Karen, or Buzzcut ever again. I still was not exactly sure what the hell had just happened or why they were so pissed off at me, unless it was me complaining about noise and floods. I got some context the next spring though. On the other side of the house Nancy rented were a couple that are a bit older than us called Sam and Jessica. I didn't know them well, but we had lived on the same street for years and I at least knew their names and had a few conversations with them when they would be out for a walk. So Jessica was out walking a few days after Nancy and her daughter moved out and I was doing yard work in the front yard. I said hello to Jessica and we chatted for a few minutes. She said something along the lines of, "You must be happy that the neighbors moved out." I said, "Yeah, we had a couple run-ins, but I didn't hate them or anything." So Jessica kind of hesitated and then said, "Oh well, they told me you hated them and you did all that stuff to them." So I asked, "What stuff did they say I did?" Apparently Nancy's daughter did talk to Jessica quite a few times and stated on multiple occasions that I was obsessed with her and psychologically torturing her. Also, I apparently was coaxing her cat onto my porch and feeding it poison-laced treats, and then when that didn't kill it, I kidnapped it, killed it and buried the body in my yard. I threw dirty cat litter under the windows of their house, which I have to assume she did, and then told Nancy I was doing it. I would act all nice when other people were around, but then threaten her when we were alone. Which was extra surprising to me since I'd never been alone with her. Even outdoors whenever I saw her, Nancy was around too. I would prank call their house all night, also a surprise since I didn't know their phone number. I would take pictures of her from the windows of my house when she went outside, and I left threatening notes in their mailbox. I was totally taken aback by this. I did not even know how to respond. My response to Jessica was something along the lines of, "Holy crap, that sounds terrible, but I didn't do any of that." I talked to her twice, I did not even know her name. Jessica seemed relieved and said, "Honestly, I don't know you that well, but that seemed pretty out of character and I had a hard time believing you did that stuff, but you never know." Later, I had a conversation with my other neighbor Linda and I asked her if she had ever talked to Nancy or her daughter. She told me Nancy's daughter had approached her and asked if she had any issues with living next door to me, to which Linda said no. To this day, I don't know if Nancy's daughter had some kind of psychosis or schizophrenia and believed I was doing all this terrible stuff, or if she was just making things up to get sympathy, but it did give some context around why all of her family and friends were such a-holes every time we would interact. They probably thought I was the devil incarnate instead of just an introvert who appreciated it being quiet at night. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much and I will see you again tomorrow.